Saturday, June 10th, a beautiful sunny Adirondack day, and I was just returning home from the long week of work downstate at, as I like to call it, the television show factory. But upon pulling into my driveway in Lake Placid, I was greeted by my 8 and 4-year-old daughters who excitedly asked, "Hey, can we go run the kids' marathon race up at the Oval?" Now, I was as excited about my daughter's desire to go run a race as they were about actually running it. So what did we do? We went up to the speed skating oval on Main Street here in Lake Placid, where the Lake Placid Marathon was all set up for tomorrow's big race, a marathon and a half marathon. So the girls ran their race around the track, and they got medals and fruit snacks and waters upon crossing the finish line. It was great for both the parents and the children. But that settled it. The girls ran their race, and now it was time for me to make a decision, so I signed up for mine. So 15 hours after spontaneously signing up, I would embark on running my very first half marathon. Oh, and I should mention, I've never run more than 6 miles in my entire life. We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Placid Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Rooster Combe. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. So let me backtrack. Now, the weekend prior, as I was gathering the Lake Placid Niner finisher registrations at the local post office, I received a flyer for the Lake Placid Marathon and Half Marathon in the LP9 mailbox. So I did know it was happening this weekend, but at the time upon receiving this flyer, I didn't really give it much thought. However, as these things tend to do, it didn't take very long for this crazy idea to begin brewing in my head. And it continued all week long while I was at work. Do I dare sign up for a half marathon this weekend? I mean, is that crazy? Now, for those who don't know, a marathon is 26.2 miles and a half marathon is therefore 13.1 miles. Since I have never run more than 6 miles ever in my life, running over double that distance would be a stretch. But as someone who loves a good challenge and has hammered out long days in the high peaks and trains consistently in the weight room year after year, this stretch, oddly enough, didn't really feel out of reach. It felt crazy, no doubt about it. In fact, it felt like just another one of those type 2 days of fun, but I've become quite accustomed to those types of days. Now, you see, when it comes to strength and conditioning, I'm actually well above average in that category, and I don't mind saying it. Now, I don't mind saying it because throughout the past decade, I've put in the work to get to that point. Day after day, week after week, year after year. And just like climbing mountains, nobody can do that work for you when it comes to health and fitness. And I am very proud of where I'm at now, down almost 100 pounds, in fact. You know, all of my hobbies involve being active, being on my feet, and most of the time being outside. So health is a huge priority within my life. Now, when it comes to training, I am a big advocate of the barbell and compound movements like squats and bench press and deadlifts. And for my cardiovascular health, as you all know, I like to climb mountains. Climbing mountains are fun. And as of a little over a year ago, I also started adding in 1 day a week of light jogging, ranging anywhere from 1 mile to 2 or sometimes 3 miles. Now, I only jog once a week because, for one, it really bores me. But I also feel it does help my body feel better, and because I do believe we should all have the ability to run a few miles without stopping, that was one of the main reasons I started adding running into my mix. I believe our hearts deserve that. So that's what I had going for me heading into this half marathon. 13.1 miles, though. Man, that is a lot more than 2 or 3 miles. But I thought to myself, hey, it's fine. When you get tired, just keep running. It's no different than when you're out on the trail. You have to just keep going. Mentally, I told myself it really would be no different than having to get back to the trailhead when your feet are fried and you're still 8 miles away from the trailhead. You just have to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. So I took that same approach into this race. So after the girls' race on Saturday, I officially was signed up for my own race. I guess I'm running a half marathon tomorrow morning, so I'd better go home, eat some food, and get some sleep. The night came and went, and despite some pre-race jitters and excitement, kind of the same excitement that I always have the night before a big day in the high peaks, I slept okay. So I drove up to the speed skating oval a little early, got there at 7:15 a.m., parked my van, and I made my way down to Main Street to the starting line at the speed skating oval. T-minus 15 minutes until we start. It was a bluebird day in the Adirondacks as I stood on the speed skating oval in my 10-year-old sneakers, cotton basketball shorts, and cotton t-shirt. And I started looking around and I noticed something. Most of these people actually look like runners. They're dressed in real runners' apparel, they're stretching, they're warming up, and they actually look like they do this a lot. You could say I definitely felt a bit out of place, but at the same time, I'm also the guy who climbed all 46 high peaks with a regular book bag style backpack. Fancy gear, it's not always necessary or really what matters all the time. The adventure is what matters and the effort you put into that adventure. So despite my casual race day attire, I did have a quiet confidence building inside me as I waited for us to start. 5 minutes until race time. At this point, the racers all started filing onto Main Street in Lake Placid, and there were hundreds and hundreds of runners. I was honestly shocked how many people there were competing. And as I walked back to the end of the line and submersed myself in the crowd, I found myself staring at the McIntyre Range, Mount Colden, Mount Marcy, and the Great Range in the distance, towering above in the sky, looking as glorious as ever. And while I stood there waiting for the race to begin, I suddenly recalled a number of grueling days out in those mountains. Days that sucked. Days that were hard, they were long. Days I didn't have enough food or water. Days where I had enough, but I never ate or drank, and then I got dehydrated anyways. Days in the rain. I'm seeing a trend here about tough days in the high peaks. But these were all days that I did not quit. Days that I finished despite the circumstances. Days where I had to dig deep mentally and physically to just complete them and get back to the trailhead. So seeing those mountains out there was truly a boost of confidence that I needed right there at the start mark. But now it was time. The 10-second countdown began as the crowd of runners and spectators alike counted down. 3, 2, 1, cue the air horns. So I slammed a goo, turned on my headphones, and it was time to run. The half marathon had begun. The trail today, if you will, was a 13.1 mile out and back that began on Main Street, Lake Placid, starting around Mirror Lake, then down Sentinel Road to the horse show grounds where the Sentinel Mountain Range awaits, past the Olympic ski jumping complex, onto River Road along the Ausable River, and eventually turning around, heading back up to the speed skating oval at the Olympic Center to finish. It would be a big day. As you could imagine, the energy was just through the roof at the start of this race. It was an incredible atmosphere in Lake Placid today. The run began going down a closed Main Street, past the Bookstore Plus, past EMS, where pretty much 100% of my hiking apparel comes from. Shout out to EMS. Now, for anybody who lives in Lake Placid, the idea of being able to run around the lake, as we call it, was a point of pride. Having the ability to actually run 2.7 miles around this iconic lake was actually a big milestone, especially if you grew up here, in high school. People be, I'm going to go run around the lake. And for most people, it's like, wow, that's a really long run. So it's a big deal. So today's race actually began running around that very lake and then continuing on for over 10 more miles, of course, but we don't need to think about that right now. But first I had to actually run around this lake, which would be a challenge since No, that's almost 3 miles, which is pretty much what I tend to tap out at. But the crowd of runners started breaking up around the end of Main Street, where it no longer felt like I was nipping someone's heels in front of me. People started to spread out a bit. But so far, so good as I quickly passed the 1 mile marker. All right, I'm a mile in, I thought to myself. So this race, it's actually real. I'm really doing this. I'm signed up. I'm running. I'm in the thick of it now. There's no going back. Here we go. Now, just before the 2 mile marker, however, I started to notice an odd sensation in my left foot. Nothing I've ever felt before, actually. It was one of those things where I started to notice every little point of pain or discomfort that I had. And since I had to run more than twice the distance that I've ever gone before, it certainly made me more cognizant of my feet and just my body in general. Almost too much. Does my foot or my calf or my knee or whatever it is, does it actually hurt? Or is it just my mind kind of playing tricks on me and feeling like it hurts? But does it actually hurt? It was hard to tell. But what did I do? Same thing I always do when I'm out on the trail too. I just kept running. Just kind of block it out and just keep going. Funny how once you do that, you're able to keep going though, right? Halfway around Mirror Lake, I started running behind a man who I nicknamed in my head as Youngblood because he had a shirt on that I thought said Youngblood down the back. But as it turned out, after pacing directly behind him for a good 7 or 8 miles, when I realized his shirt actually said Young LA and not Youngblood. But shout out to Youngblood guy. Also shout out to anyone who's ever seen the movie Youngblood, starring a young Rob Lowe as a hockey player. Great movie. This was the point around 2 miles where I was really running my pace. Well, Youngblood guy and I were running my pace. And now I say it on the podcast and I tell my guide clients and I wrote it in my book and I tell people who email me or message me online, go as fast as you can, but as slow as you need to go so that you'll never need to stop. That is the pace that I feel you should hike at, and that is the pace that I ran with today. And this way, you're always moving, and you'll find that comfortable and maintainable pace that you can maintain all day long. And I think that's very important so that you're always moving. So this was the exact approach that I took with the race today. I found my pace, and I just let it rip. Now, there were plenty of times where the excitement of the day or the desire to just pass people occurred, but I kept reminding myself, stay the course and stay the pace, just like you do when you're out on the trail. So throughout the initial 2.7 mile trip around Mirror Lake, I probably had moments of grief for every body part on my body. My quad feels kind of funny, or my foot feels a little funny right now. I wonder if that's a new feeling in my calf. Again, maybe it was all in my head or maybe it was actually part of the process of getting better. I don't really know. But what I did know was Moose Mountain and Mackenzie Mountain towered above on my right, and they were looking as glorious as ever as I was about to finish the first section of the run around the lake. So I broke this run up in my mind the same way I do a hiking trail, via mental checkpoints, trail junctions, roads, and so on. So for me, Mirror Lake was section 1, and Sentinel Road was section 2. So as I finished section 1, I headed down Parkside Drive as the Sawtooth Mountain Range sat in the distance. Oh, and I also passed the old residence of your favorite Adirondack YouTube sensation, Mr. Jonathan Zaharik, and then down Mill Hill as the Sentinel Road section began. Section number 2. Now, it was on this hill that I texted my wife, Mill Hill, letting her know that it was time to start rallying the kids because it won't be long before I pass our street that I live on. One of the fortunate things about this particular race was that a large part of the route consists of roads that I run very frequently. Kind of like my home turf in a sense. I'm just going to be merging a lot of different roads together today into a very long run that I've never come close to even doing. But hey, we just got to keep moving. So down Mill Hill, over the mighty Chubb River, and on I went, still following nicely behind Youngblood guy. By this point, I was a few miles into the race, which is, for the most part, as far as I ever really run. But it really was one of those things where we just tend to pace our minds for the day. So when I run a few miles, I probably just let off the steam a few miles in, whereas today, since I know I had so far to go, I wasn't even near the end mentally. Clearly, I had paced myself correctly in my mind as much as with my legs. And that was a good thing. Kind of like when we do a hike and it's only 3 miles long versus a hike when it's 15 miles long, we just pace our minds differently. And it's very helpful and very important to do so. But the day was great, as the spectators and friends and families of the runners all held up their signs and cheered, and they rang their cowbells. There's something about marathons and cowbells. So I'm not really sure why the cowbell is a staple of races, but it sure seems to be the case. There was even one sign that read, "Let's go, James." So I can only assume that the stranger who held that sign had me in mind when they created it, and in no way was there another racer named James that day. But before I knew it, I was passing the corner store, which for all of you hikers out there has, in my opinion, the best sandwich in Lake Placid. Just a shout out to them and, nudge you into a direction where I think you get the best sandwich in town. But I sent my wife one more text that said corner store as I passed the 4-mile marker and rounded the corner, heading towards the street that I live on. And as I was approaching, my wife and daughters were nowhere to be found. Oh no, I can't miss them. But I continued staring at that intersection as I approached my street, wondering if they'd make it down in time before I passed. And then, like a scene from a movie, as I was no more than 20 yards away from the street, I see the stroller, my wife, and my 3 girls come rushing down the hill. It was perfect timing.
Woohoo! Right on time! Keep going! Or I'll see you at the finish line! Woohoo!
It was really an amazing thing to see my daughters with huge smiles on their faces and cheering as their dad set out to challenge himself today to try to do something big. I've only been a parent for 8 years now, but I can say wholeheartedly that seeing my girls smiling and cheering for me was easily one of the best moments of my parenting career to date. It was truly an amazing thing. So I smiled and waved and I said, "I'll see you at the finish line," and I carried on running. A quick yet very impactful interaction 4 miles into the race. And only 9 more miles to go. Woof. But hey, I'm in the middle of section 2, 4 miles in, and I've got a lot more miles left in the tank because I've been pacing myself correctly. Plus, I just got that nice mental boost from my family, so the legs and the feet, they were ready to keep going. Half a mile later, the road comes out to the horse show grounds along with the best view of the Sentinel Mountain Range in town, along with a few of the high peaks, including Whiteface Mountain, Algonquin, and of course, the Olympic ski jumps. The sun was still shining, the sky was blue, and the mountains were green. It was a truly beautiful sight. And in case you're wondering, there's only one mountain in the entire Sentinel Range with a trail to the summit. Do you know what mountain that is? I'll give you a second to think. All right, time is up. It is Pitch-Off Mountain. Now, there's a fun fact about the Sentinel Range here in the ADK. But outside of that mountain, it is a very untapped, minimally explored wilderness. Anyways, I grabbed a sip of water for the first time at an aid station just outside the horse show grounds. You see, when I run, I never have any water or food, namely because I never run long enough to warrant it. Those 2-mile, 20-minute jogs don't exactly make you need a fancy water bottle or a fancy belt or energy snacks, It's usually pretty quick. But as I always say when you're on the trail, stay ahead of the hunger curve. Eat and drink before you need to eat and drink. That way your body is always functioning at a high level. Because once you start to get hungry, sometimes it's almost too late at that point and your body's not going to work as well. So I snagged a Gatorade from a volunteer handing out drinks as I tried to run slowly without stopping as I grabbed and drank it. Then I slammed my second of 3 goos that I had in my pocket and I was ready to go. Okay, another 100 calories and some quick carbs were in the tank. Time to keep running and keep the muscles hydrated, salted, and functioning properly. Past the horse show grounds I went as I followed directly behind Youngblood Guy, and we started downhill towards River Road as Cobble Hill sat in the foreground to the east, while Whiteface Mountain towered directly behind it. Soon I'd be passing over the Ausable River, where one of my favorite views in Lake Placid can be seen. Now you see, as you drive over the Ausable River Bridge when you're entering Lake Placid, just after River Road, there's a split-second moment when you look down the river towards the Sentinel Range where the mountains and river align perfectly. They create a picturesque, postcard-worthy view that just screams Adirondack backcountry. So the next time you drive into Lake Placid, stare out the passenger side window when you go over this bridge and you'll see that one quick, perfect view that aligns that I'm talking about. But don't blink, because you might miss that exact moment where the river and mountains align. Also, keep your eyes on the road, though, too. Don't look out the window, too. Also, look where you're driving. Probably keep those eyes on the road. Don't want to risk an accident or hitting a runner on the road, right? Speaking of running, I was around the 5-mile point as I crossed over the Ausable River, and I followed the course onto River Road. And while I wasn't quite in uncharted territory just yet, I was about there. But I was feeling good. The energy of the race and the crowd thus far had been fantastic. However, the River Road section would prove to be the real test. This windy road boasts amazing views of the Sentinel Mountain Range while winding around the Ausable River for miles. It's a real, just endless road. And there weren't many spectators down this long, desolate country road, and this section was going to be, in my opinion, the make-or-break section of the race. It was also where the course's turnaround point would be, so there was a lot to happen in this next section. And as I approached the 6-mile marker, I remember saying to myself, all right, I'm kind of bored now. A feeling that I know well, especially when I'm out in the mountains and, you reach that point in the day, usually when you're standing on the final summit where you think to yourself, all right, my cup is full. I had a great day. I'd like to be home now. But too bad I still have to walk 5 miles off this mountain back to my car. Anyone else have that feeling ever? I usually do. But what else could I do? I just kept running, just like I just keep hiking. Sure, I was a bit bored, but I was far from finished. At this point, however, I reached the uncharted territory, and I certainly began feeling some muscles getting tired. For me, it was the quads and especially my calves in particular. Now this, however, was okay in my mind because my joints were feeling just fine. And as anyone who pushes themselves hard on the trail or in the gym, muscular fatigue is okay. It's joint pain that's the real killer. So fortunately, at this point in the race, over 6 miles in, my joints were feeling pretty good. As I ran down the long, desolate, never-ending stretch down River Road as the racers who already hit the turnaround point were coming back in the opposite direction, I watched what was going on in their faces, their demeanor. The all smiles and joyful start was now at the point of seeing people fighting their own battles inside their head as they keep up their pace and keep themselves in the game and in the race. I couldn't help but think to myself as each racer passed me, I wonder what's going through his head right now. I wonder what this girl is thinking about. I wonder if she has any aches and pains. Hey, I wonder what that guy's listening to right now. Is it a podcast? Is he listening to music? What's he listening to? On the outside, we all look the same for the most part, just people running and pushing ourselves. But on the inside at that moment, there were certainly hundreds of different battles going through each person's brains. And since running is mostly a solo sport, it's really just you and your mind. But I continued fighting my own battles. But the battle for me was simple. Just keep running your race. Stick to your pace. I passed the 8-mile marker at 9:14 a.m. My heart rate was comfortable, but my calves and quads were beginning to tighten up more and more with every mile. But I've never gone this far, so this is somewhat to be expected. And as I mentioned a few times so far in this podcast, I feel it's worth saying again, I took the same approach with this race that I take with hiking up mountains. Find your slow but very steady pace and just stick to it. When you're running a race with lots of other people and the excitement that comes with it, it's easy to get caught up in the moment and try going too fast and then eventually burning out. Oh, let me pass this person, and I'm going to pass this person, and now this person. But I constantly reminded myself, ignore the other people, stick to your pace, just keep running. Eventually you might pass some people or some people might pass you. That's okay. This is you versus you. So that's what I did. It was another lesson that I learned in the Adirondack Mountains that surrounded me during this entire race. And as any of you who've listened to this podcast for long enough know, I love the adventure and I love traveling into the unknown, be it in the mountains or in real life or in the weight room or on the pavement or even in my own mind. And for those who know me personally, you know that I'm a firm believer that it's good to test yourself to see what you're made of from time to time, to see how much grit you have inside you, how much fight, and that's what this day truly was about for me as I embarked on this unknown adventure running around the roads of my hometown. I kept reminding myself, one foot in front of the other and just keep jogging. Now, River Road was a challenge because, as I mentioned, there was little to no spectators here, so the whole atmosphere changes. The race day energy was different now. And this was the stretch where it's really up to you to fight those demons inside your mind. It was up to the runners to keep each other motivated. So, as a natural-born encourager, that's kind of my sweet spot. By encouraging and clapping for those people running around me, both in front of me and behind me, it actually gave me just as much energy to keep moving one leg in front of the other as it did for other people. But I continued to pound the pavement, lost in my own head, and then suddenly I saw another racer coming the opposite direction, waving to me saying, "Hey, James!" It was actually a friend and a podcast listener named Olivia. I actually hiked McNaughton with her years ago, and there's even a podcast episode about that hike. Shortly after this quick encounter with a friend and podcast listener, as I rounded another one of the million bends on River Road, I could hear an exceptionally loud group of people. It was the turnaround point. Yes, there was the big aid station, there was a porta potty, and there was a lot of happy, cheering people. And at this point, getting to the turnaround point, that's what I was searching for. So I slugged a quick cup of Gatorade, and then as I threw the cup in the garbage, well, I tried throwing it in the garbage, I completely missed, and I got a volunteer somewhat wet. So I stopped dead in my tracks and went over to pick it up while apologizing, and the volunteer said, No, I got it. Just keep on running. Man, I felt terrible, but what a champion those volunteers truly are. After turning around to begin the second half of the River Road section, I was certainly given a mental boost because now I just had to run back to the Olympic speed skating oval. I had already run around the lake, I ran down Sentinel Road, I ran down River Road, and now it was time just to head back to the finish line. Of course, there's quite a few miles still to go, but in my mind, that's how I broke it up. And like with any out and back hike, once you turn around, there's always that boost that you get, in my opinion. So back down River Road I went, continuing to run my pace. But something was different now. Someone was missing. Youngblood's shirt was nowhere to be found. I don't know where he went. I remembered seeing him at the turnaround, but then he vanished. Now there's only 3 possible explanations for his sudden disappearance. 1, he sped up at the turnaround and just blasted through me. 2, he stopped to use the porta potty. Or 3, he vanished into thin air at the hands of either Sasquatch or extraterrestrials. What, did you think I wouldn't sneak a Bigfoot reference into this episode? But the race continued, and as I ran back towards the ski jumps and back down River Road, I noticed that not only was I not in last place, I was actually ahead of a large amount of people. And while I'm a firm believer in everyone is only competing against themselves, this realization was a confirmation in my mind that, yes, you can do this. You're not in last place. So for me, that was a big mental boost. While I was running, I got a text message from my mom at 9:35 asking me, "Hey, how's it going?" And at that moment, I was passing the mile 10 marker. So I snapped a photo and sent it back to her. And at this point, I was 1 hour and 35 minutes and 10 miles into the race. Holy cow, I thought to myself, 10 miles in, that is insane. The 10-mile marker was the first moment in the race where I really began seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, where I knew not only are you going to finish this race, you're going to finish strong. For a person who's never enjoyed running and only added light jogging to his training just a year ago, the idea of running 10 miles without stopping was insane to me. Undoubtedly something I never expected to ever do, ever. Even 2 weeks ago, I would have never thought I'm going to be doing this. Sadly, however, though, I did still have 3 miles to go, which again is typically the high-end distance of what I ever run, period, except now I had to do that after already going 10 miles. But what do? 1 foot in front of the other, right? Just because you made it back to Marcy Dam doesn't mean the hike's over, right? You still got to get back to the trailhead, and I still had to get back to the oval. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. The running continued, and soon I saw those lovely ski jumps above me and the end of River Road, thus marking the end of the River Road section. I was entering the final portion of the race, the section that I dubbed, wait for it, the final section. I clearly did not squeeze much creative juice out of that name, but hey, that's what it was. Very direct. Now, for all of you who are familiar with driving into Lake Placid, there's a big hill going along the ski jumps from River Road up to the horse show ground. This hill was killer. Now, when I started this race, I had 2 goals for the day. 1, just finish the race, and 2, do it without ever stopping to walk. So as I began running up this seemingly endless, gargantuan hill, what did I do? Stop to walk? Of course not. I slowed down my pace and found a slow pace that I could maintain without ever stopping. Once again, it's a very simple concept, and I believe it is the key to success. Whether you're hiking mountains, whether you're transforming your life or running your first half marathon, slow and steady with an emphasis on steady is the way to go. And that pace got me to the top of the hill. And as I crested the hill, feeling good and strong, there was another aid station up ahead. And then I went and grabbed another cup of water, slammed it home, and I threw the cup in the trash. But at this moment, however, was when it all came to a halt. So as I threw away my cup, I accidentally knocked my wedding ring off my finger and it fell to the ground, causing me to have to abruptly stop, turn around a few steps, and go and bend over to pick the ring up off the ground. And suddenly, an all too familiar feeling overcame my entire body as I squatted down to pick up that ring. So for all you High Peaks hikers out there, you know the feeling when you finish a big day, you finally get back to your car and your body just shuts down as you drive to Stewart's to get that post-hike milkshake. And then when you walk into Stewart's after the hike to get that post-hike milkshake and you just walk in looking like a broken version of the Tin Man, yeah, I know many of you know it very well. Well, as I squatted down to pick up the ring, my quads, my back, my calves, everything felt like they all stopped working simultaneously. And dear Lord, all of a sudden I was feeling the soreness of my entire body at that moment. Squatting down has never been more difficult than it was in that moment in my life. Halfway down, as I was bending over, desperately stretching my arm in an attempt to pick up the ring so I wouldn't have to bend over anymore, I even had a moment in my head where I thought, I love my wife, but it's just a ring. I can just get another one, right? I'll just leave it. But thankfully, I didn't let my moment of literal weakness cloud my better judgment, and by the grace of God, I was able to just get a hold of that ring and stand back up and then keep running. But my God, the moment of abruptly stopping, turning around, and bending over was by far the hardest 5 seconds of the entire race up to that point as I crossed the 11-mile marker. Now, I was back on my usual running route down Sentinel Road, and it was just around this point where a new challenge was tossed into the mix. Enter the rain. It was only a matter of time as afternoon showers were expected today, despite the Bluebird Adirondack morning. But fortunately, the raindrops came towards the end, and though light, they actually felt fantastic. It was a light drizzle, and it came just at a great time in the race for me because those light drops undoubtedly cooled me off, and they felt great. But, you know, onward towards the finish line, as I passed my house again, I passed the corner store, and I headed towards the home stretch, running the exact road that I jogged pretty much 90% of the time when I go out running. And now the cheering crowds were back, the cowbells were back, the signs, the encouraging words from strangers, the vibes were strong once again. Mile 12 complete. The final mile was upon me. It was happening as I headed into the final hills back up to Main Street to the finish line. Now, it is quite fitting for a half marathon in the Adirondacks to end with a good-sized elevation gain to the finish line. But hey, I've climbed a few high peaks in my day, right? A little last-minute elevation won't hurt anybody. Once again, as I ran up that hill, I slowed down my pace so that I could maintain running as I ascended the final hills towards the speed skating oval as the McIntyre Range, Mount Marcy, and Mount Colden towered behind me, a view that I turned my head around to take in multiple times while I ran up that final hill because you just can't miss it. It's fantastic going up that hill. As I made it to the top, up above, I saw my wife and 3 daughters once again waving and cheering me on just before the finish line. The final quarter mile to go. Up the hill, past Stewart's, which I went into to get a quick milkshake before I finished. Just kidding, but that would have been awesome. But it was time to get to the finish line. I rounded the corner and ran back into the speed skating oval where I started from just over 2 hours, 13.1 miles ago. And I rounded the oval and triumphantly ran across the finish line where my family greeted me with signs and smiles.
James Appleton from right here in Lake Placid, New York. Well done, James.
I freaking did it. I completed the challenge that I set out to accomplish. My final time for the day was 2 hours, 6 minutes, and 16 seconds. What a day. The goals of the day were accomplished, and I am just thrilled that my daughters were there to see it. I set out to do something, and I did it. And it was yet another amazing Adirondack adventure. Now, I decided to make this podcast episode to tell this story for a few reasons. One, so my mother could hear the marathon story. And two, so all of you 80K lovers can see firsthand how lessons that I learned here in the high peaks apply to yet another area of life. And three, to show you how strong and resilient our bodies can be when our minds commit and when we simply refuse to quit. What crazy things you can accomplish when you find that slow and steady pace and you simply stick to it. When you find that fastest speed that you can maintain that doesn't require you to ever stop, no matter how slow it may be, so you can always be moving forward. This is something that I've continued to learn time and time again over the last decade. Now, I believe we're all stronger than we know and that we're all capable of doing things that we never thought possible when we put in the work to get there. Whether that's physically in the mountains, whether that's out on the pavement, or it's even in your personal lives. Big things can be accomplished and big things can be made in your life when you find that slow and steady pace forward and just let it rip, mile after mile after mile. Now, if you've never heard the pilot episode of this podcast where I talk about the time that I turned around climbing Big Slide because it was just too hard and I was just way too out of shape, I recommend checking it out. You see, I've been the guy on the couch, so I understand the difficulties of helping yourself become the person that you want to become. I was that guy for a very long time. And I can tell you one thing, being the guy at the finish line who put in the work and refused to quit, it's much more satisfying. You know, when you cross the finish line or you obtain whatever goal you're working towards, all your hard work is validated and you'll be glad that you didn't quit, no matter how hard it was. Making real changes in your life, yeah, it's hard. And again, I've been there, but if I can do it, I know everybody else can too. If I never made, these big lifestyle changes not long after that day on Big Slide, I would have never experienced the 46 high peaks. I would have never learned the lessons that they taught me, and I definitely never would have experienced the adventure that I went on this day. When we learn how to push ourselves and we learn how to motivate ourselves through challenge, nothing is out of reach anymore for us. And that's a powerful place to be, if you ask me. Honestly, I knew I'd succeed in this race today. Despite being a power lifter who just likes to lift weights and a guy who goes hiking who rarely runs and has definitely never run even half this distance before, I knew I would do well. Why? Because I believe nothing is out of reach for me. The same way that I believe nothing is out of reach for any of you who are still listening to this podcast episode. Overcoming hard can become business as usual once the word quit is dropped from your vocabulary. Making real life changes in your life, yeah, it's hard. I've been there. Making changes that stick long term, it's even harder. I believe learning to keep yourself fighting through the darkness and keep yourself in the race, moving one foot in front of the other, and simply just embracing the journey as it's unfolding is the true secret to success when it comes to elevating your life or accomplishing a goal in any capacity, whether that's out in the backcountry, whether that's in the gym, or it's in your personal life. Growth is hard, it's uncomfortable, goals are hard, but that's okay, they should be. Seeking to do more to unlock your true potential is a constant battle, and it's one that you're really going to fight all day, every day, but it's one that we have to fight daily. But I also believe it's one that we can win daily. How? By accepting the uncomfortable moments and realizing that, yes, this is a moment of growth, this is a moment to challenge myself, and then reminding yourself, hey, it's not easy, but that's okay. I can still do this. It's amazing what you can do when you tell yourself that. You can run a marathon or a half marathon having never run half that distance before when you just tell yourself, yeah, I can do this. Whether you're in the backcountry, miles back from your car, you're in, real life, just remember that your mind is very powerful. Your body is very powerful. And when you keep reminding yourself of that fact, it's actually easier to find the courage to just keep pushing, to keep running, to keep hiking, to keep moving forward towards that finish line. And then when you do this time and time again, you'll eventually unlock something new in your mind. You awaken a sleeping giant that lives inside of you. Now, I believe we're all capable of doing amazing things when we consistently do the work, when we find that slow and steady pace that doesn't require stopping, and again, we just let it rip, follow the pace. Slow and steady doesn't always necessarily win the race, but I believe that slow and steady finishes the race, and to me, finishing is truly winning. Finishing whatever you start is what matters, not quitting. Now remember, I am nothing special. I'm just someone who chooses not to quit. Whether I'm pushing myself in the mountains, whether I push myself in a race that I signed up for the night before, or in everyday life, and I choose to surround myself with people who do the same thing. I wholeheartedly believe that you're all capable of doing incredible things in this life. So here's to embracing and overcoming hard and pushing ourselves to do something outside our comfort zones, to challenge ourselves and see what we're made of so that we can realize the true potential that lies inside of you. Cheers to all of you. Thanks for listening to this very unique episode of the 46 of 46 podcast. And thank you all to the podcast listeners who cheered me on during that race. It was an insanely memorable day for me. For more information on the podcast, my Adirondack guide service, or my book on climbing the 46 high peaks, head over to 46of46.com. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen. And in closing this week, I'll leave you with this. Whatever goals you're working towards, whatever changes you're trying to make in life, remember to just accept the darkness, accept those dark times, embrace the journey, and keep pushing towards the light. When you finally cross that finish line, you'll be really glad you didn't give up. See you on the trails, everyone.